At 7:12 that morning, she was already standing at my ranch gate like she owned the dirt under her heels. Hair perfect. Voice sharp. Phone in one hand. Her son beside her with that smug look people get when they think someone else's land is already halfway theirs. She pointed past the fence and told me I needed to leave. Not later. Not after a hearing. Right then. She said the HOA had community rights to the property. She said her son needed the land more than I did. She said if I refused to cooperate, she would call 911 and have me removed for trespassing. On my own ranch. I remember looking at her, then at the pasture behind me, then at the gate she had never had a right to touch in the first place. I told her to make the call. That was the part she liked most. She smiled when she dialed. Because in her head, this was already over. She thought the deputies would roll up, hear her version first, and push me off my own property before breakfast. What she didn't know was simple. I had worn this county's badge longer than she had lived behind her HOA entrance sign. My name is Wade Mercer, and by the time Melissa Hart showed up at my ranch gate with her son beside her, this had already been building for months. That was the part nobody driving past on the county road would have understood. To them, it probably looked sudden. A polished HOA woman at a fence line. A ranch owner standing still on the other side. A land argument ugly enough to bring a phone into the air before breakfast. But nothing about that morning was sudden. Melissa had been testing the edges for a long time. The ranch sat along the far side of the development, where the clean sidewalks and stone entrance walls gave way to open pasture, feed sheds, fencing, and old water lines. To normal people, the line was obvious. Subdivision on one side. Ranch on the other. But to Melissa, obvious things only mattered when they helped her. Once her son started talking about wanting acreage, that line became something she treated like a suggestion instead of a fact. She began with small comments. Unused land. Future value. Community access. Then came the harder version. She started talking like the ranch was wasted on me. Like open pasture beside an HOA was some kind of social failure instead of private property. She asked questions about old boundary markers, county access roads, maintenance strips, and whether the western fence had ever really been reviewed. Every question sounded casual on the surface. But the meaning underneath was always the same. She wanted me uncertain before she ever asked for anything directly. That never worked. I knew the line. My father knew it. My grandfather knew it. The deed matched the survey matched the fence, and the tax records matched all of it. There was no mystery anywhere except in the story Melissa kept trying to build around the truth. And once she realized I was not going to be softened by emails, side comments, or HOA language, she did what people like her always do when persuasion fails. She reached for public pressure. That was why she came to the gate with her son that morning. Not to ask. Not to negotiate. To stage the moment. To make the ranch look disputed before the facts could speak. She thought if she acted certain enough, and if a 911 call made the scene official enough, the land might start feeling like hers before anyone bothered to ask whose name was actually sitting on the deed. Melissa stopped at the gate like she was arriving for a closing, not a confrontation. That was the part that almost made me laugh. She had on a pressed white blouse, dark sunglasses, and the kind of posture women like her practice in mirrors when they want to look calm while doing something ugly. Her son stood half a step behind her, boots too clean for ranch land, arms folded like he was already imagining where he would put a barn, a guest house, or whatever little dream he had built in his head from staring at somebody else's acreage too long. Melissa did not start with a greeting. She started with ownership. She said the ranch had become a matter of community concern. She said the HOA had long-standing interests in the land bordering the subdivision. She said her son had a legitimate need for expansion property and that it was time I stopped acting like the acreage existed only for me. I let her talk. That was always the easiest way to hear where the lie really lived. She never used the deed. Never mentioned the parcel number. Never named a survey. She kept everything soft and slippery. Community interests. Shared boundary assumptions. Future use. Responsible transition. The kind of language that sounds official until you realize none of it points to a single recorded fact. Then she made the mistake I knew she would make eventually. She said the board had reviewed the matter and determined my continued occupation of the ranch was obstructing reasonable access and future planning tied to the neighborhood. Occupation. Not ownership. Not title. Occupation. That word told me everything. Because people who know the land is yours always try to argue around use first. They talk about access, history, neighbor rights, old understandings. Anything that lets them stay near the property line without touching the one thing that would kill the whole performance instantly. Proof. Her son finally spoke then, and somehow that made it worse. He said he had plans for the acreage that would benefit everyone around us. Trails. Equestrian lots. Better value for the neighborhood. He talked about my ranch like it was a missed opportunity instead of the ground my family had worked before either of them ever set foot in this county. I looked at him. Then at her. Then back at the pasture behind me where the morning light was just reaching the fence line. And right there, before she ever dialed 911, before the deputies arrived, before the badge changed the whole shape of the day, I understood the ugliest part of what was standing at my gate. Melissa was not asking for land. She was asking for surrender. I told Melissa the same thing I had told her in every softer version of this fight. Show me the paper. Not the HOA tone. Not the board gossip. Not whatever dream her son had built in his head after staring at my pasture for too long. Paper. A deed. A survey. A recorded claim. Anything real enough to survive daylight. She did not have it. That was obvious the second her face tightened. People with proof do not get offended by simple questions. They answer them. Melissa answered the way bluffers always do when they realize the other person is not going to help them carry the lie. She got louder. She said I was being difficult. She said the HOA had already tried to handle this privately. She said the community was tired of my attitude and that my refusal to cooperate was forcing her to escalate. Then she looked at her son like she wanted him to see exactly how unreasonable I was being for not stepping aside while she dressed theft up in neighborhood language. I asked her one more time which parcel she thought belonged to her son. She did not answer that either. Instead, she pulled out her phone and said if I wanted to play games, the deputies could settle it. That was the moment her son smiled. Not a polite smile. Not nervous. The kind of smile people wear when they think somebody else is about to win the fight for them. He actually stepped closer to the gate and said, "You really should have handled this before law enforcement got involved." That line almost made me shake my head. Because there is a certain kind of arrogance that only grows in people who have never had to test their confidence against the truth. He thought the uniform would create ownership where none existed. He thought a 911 call could do what paperwork never had. And Melissa, standing there with the morning wind moving through the fence grass and my ranch stretching quiet behind me, believed the exact same thing. So I opened the gate. Not wide. Just enough to step through and stand on the road side, close enough that neither of them could pretend I was hiding behind distance. Then I told her to make the call. Her eyes lit up when I said it. That was what she had wanted all morning. Permission to turn pressure into spectacle. She raised the phone, dialed, and started talking before the dispatcher could probably even finish the first line. Trespass. Refusal to leave. Community land dispute. Hostile landowner blocking rightful access. She stacked the lie fast. And while she did, I just stood there and listened, because sometimes the best thing you can do is let a person fully commit to the story that is about to bury them. Melissa did not just call 911. She performed it. That was the first thing that told me how deeply she believed her own bluff. She turned slightly so her voice would carry, one hand on her hip, the other holding the phone high like the dispatcher was not enough. She wanted the road, the gate, and her son to hear every word. She wanted the call itself to become part of the pressure. "This man is refusing to leave private community land," she said. "He's blocking lawful access and becoming aggressive." Aggressive? I had not raised my voice once. Her son kept that same smug look on his face, but I noticed something small in him then. He was watching me too carefully. People who are truly confident do not keep checking the other man's face for panic. They assume it's already there. He was looking for it. Waiting for it. And because he could not find it, his smile had started tightening at the corners. Melissa kept talking. She said the HOA had reviewed the matter. She said her son had a rightful claim. She said I was trespassing on land connected to the development and refusing every effort at peaceful resolution. It was a clean little lie, almost impressive in structure. She left out the missing deed. Left out the survey. Left out the fact that the fence, the pasture, the water line, and every tax record in the county all leaned in my direction so hard the truth barely had to stand up. Then she said the one thing that mattered most. She told the dispatcher she feared the situation could turn unsafe. That was when I understood she was not just trying to win an argument. She was trying to manufacture authority. Not legal authority. Not ownership. Emotional authority. The kind that forms when people hear danger before they hear facts. She wanted responding deputies arriving with tension already in their heads, already expecting a difficult man on disputed ground. Already halfway prepared to treat me like the problem before anyone asked whose ranch they were standing in front of. Her son folded his arms and said, almost casually, "This would all go easier if you'd just cooperate." I looked at him, then at Melissa. Still speaking into the phone like volume could build a property claim from thin air, and I realized both of them had made the same mistake. They thought law enforcement was something you summon. They had no idea what it means when the landowner you're trying to bluff has spent most of his life on the other side of that call. I did not tell Melissa who I was. Not yet. That was the point. A reveal only matters when the lie has had enough time to stand on its own legs first. If I had cut her off the second she started spinning that story for dispatch, she would have changed shape immediately. Softer voice. Smaller claims. A quick pivot into concern and confusion. People like Melissa survive by adjusting before the record settles. I had no interest in helping her do that. So I let her finish. She ended the call with one final line about an uncooperative male refusing to vacate HOA-controlled ranch property, then lowered the phone with a satisfied little breath like she had just signed a winning contract. Her son looked at me and said the deputies would clear this up quickly once they heard the facts. The facts, I said, would be a good place to start. Melissa ignored that. She was already leaning into the next performance. She told me I had one last chance to leave before this became official. She said once law enforcement arrived, I would regret forcing the situation to go that far. She kept using that tone people reserve for children and servants, the tone meant to make obedience feel like the only graceful option left. I looked down the county road and listened. Not for sirens. For timing. I knew how dispatch moved out here. I knew which unit was likely closest. I knew how long it would take for the call notes to hit the screen, how the first responding deputy would read them, and how fast that first impression could change the second he saw the gate. The fence, the pasture, and me standing exactly where I had every right to stand. Melissa did not know any of that. To her, deputies were an effect. You dialed. They arrived. They gave weight to whoever sounded most urgent. That was why she kept smiling. Then I saw it. Dust first. A vehicle turning off the county road bend. Her son noticed it half a second later and straightened up like he expected the next few minutes to belong to him. Melissa tucked the phone against her side and lifted her chin, ready to greet the deputies like an injured party who had finally been taken seriously. I stayed where I was. Hands loose. Voice quiet. Gate behind me. Ranch behind that. Morning wind moving through the fence grass like nothing in the world had changed except one woman's confidence and how badly it was about to age. The first deputy rolled up slow, not dramatic, just the way experienced people arrive when they know the call might be messy but not necessarily dangerous. Dust settled around the truck. Door opened. Boots hit gravel. A second unit stopped farther back near the bend, close enough to support, far enough to watch the shape of the scene before stepping into it. Melissa lit up the second she saw them. Her whole posture changed. Shoulders back. Voice ready. She looked like a woman who believed the next 5 minutes had already been written in her favor. The deputy nearest the gate glanced at her first, then at me, then over my shoulder toward the pasture. That was the moment I knew the call was already weakening. Because real deputies do not arrive blind. They read the road, the fence, the distance, the body language. They notice who is loud, who is still, who keeps pointing, who keeps waiting. Melissa did not understand that. She stepped toward him immediately and launched straight into the version of the story she had been rehearsing since before she dialed. She said I was refusing to leave community property. She said her son had lawful interest in the land. She said the HOA had every right to control access and I was escalating the problem by remaining on site after repeated warnings. The deputy listened. Then he asked the first useful question. Whose ranch is this? Melissa answered too fast. The community has standing over this section. Not whose ranch. Standing. Section. Community. All soft words. No owner. No deed. No parcel number. The deputy looked at me next. I told him the land was Mercer Ranch property, deeded, taxed, fenced, and occupied exactly as it had been for years. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush the explanation. I just gave him facts in the order facts like to be given. Melissa jumped in again, saying the board had reviewed the issue and that I was obstructing rightful use. The deputy asked her if she had the survey, deed reference, or parcel documents with her. She did not. Her son tried to step in then. He said everyone knew the ranch edge was under review and that I was only making things harder by forcing deputies to settle what should have already been obvious. That was when the deputy looked at him the way seasoned lawmen look at civilians who think confidence counts as evidence. Then he looked back at me. And for the first time that morning, Melissa's certainty started to slip because the scene she had imagined was not happening. No one was ordering me off the land. No one was taking her side on tone alone. The deputies had arrived, yes. But they were asking the wrong person to prove the claim. Melissa saw the shift before her son did. It was small. Just a pause in the deputy's face. A second look at me instead of her. But women like Melissa survive on tiny signals. They know exactly when a room, a sidewalk, or in this case a ranch gate starts leaning away from them. And the second she felt that, she pushed harder. She said the HOA had every right to protect land reserved for future community use. She said I had been warned repeatedly. She said her son had development plans already under discussion and that my continued refusal to cooperate was turning a simple transition into a public scene. The deputy asked one question. What transition? That hit her harder than it should have. Because the truth was simple. There was no transition. No sale. No easement. No court order. No sign transfer. Just a woman who wanted the ranch to become her son's opportunity and had been speaking about that wish for so long she had started mistaking it for legal movement. I reached into the truck by the gate and pulled out the folder I kept there for exactly this reason. Deed copy. Parcel map. Tax record. Old survey. Nothing dramatic. Just paper. The kind of paper that makes bluffing harder the second it comes into daylight. I handed the deed to the first deputy. He read the name. Then the tract description. Then he looked over my shoulder at the fence line and the pasture rolling out behind it. The second deputy had moved closer by then and was reading the parcel map when Melissa finally made the mistake I had been waiting for all morning. She demanded to know why they were taking my documents seriously before removing me. Not asking. Demanding. That changed the air again. Because now the issue was no longer just a bad land claim. Now it was a woman trying to instruct responding deputies on how fast they should remove a man from property she could not document as hers. Her son started talking too, saying the county knew the HOA had interests there and that everyone in the neighborhood understood the ranch was tied to future expansion. The first deputy looked at him and said, "Understanding isn't ownership." That line landed like a fence post being driven into hard ground. Melissa opened her mouth again, but the second deputy was already looking up from the parcel map. He stared at me for a second, then his expression changed. Recognition. Not of the ranch. Of me. And the exact moment that happened, Melissa's whole morning started collapsing in a way no HOA email was ever going to fix. The second deputy knew exactly who I was. He did not say it loudly. He did not snap to attention or do anything theatrical. He just looked at me a little longer than before, then glanced at the first deputy, and that tiny exchange between them changed the whole shape of the morning. Melissa missed it at first because she was too busy still trying to force momentum back in her direction. She kept talking. She said I was manipulating the scene by producing paperwork late. She said the HOA had been dealing with this land issue for months. She said the deputies needed to act before I caused more trouble for the community. The son nodded beside her like every sentence she threw into the air was one more brick in a house they had already built in their heads. Then the first deputy handed the deed back to me. Not to Melissa. To me. And he asked, very calmly, "Sheriff, do you want to walk us through the boundary from your side?" That was the moment her face changed. Not all at once. First confusion. Then disbelief. Then that awful pause people have when their brain is still trying to argue with a fact their body has already accepted. Her son looked at me, then at the deputies, then back at me again like maybe he had heard wrong and the title would disappear if nobody repeated it. It didn't. I told them exactly where the line ran. Fence post. Creek bend. Old marker near the cedar break. Western pasture edge. Same explanation I had given in maps, letters, and tax records. No drama. No victory speech. Just land described the way land is supposed to be described by people who actually know it. Melissa finally found her voice and said, "He never told me he was the sheriff." The first deputy looked at her and said, "He didn't need to." That hit harder than anything else. Because it stripped the whole morning down to its ugliest truth. None of this had depended on my badge. The land was mine whether I wore one or not. The deed was valid whether she respected it or not. She had called 911 trying to throw a man off his own ranch, and the worst part for her was not that I was the sheriff. It was that even if I hadn't been, she still would have been wrong. After the reveal, the whole gate scene changed in the quietest possible way. No one gasped. No one apologized. No one suddenly turned dramatic. That was what made it hit so hard. Melissa had called 911 expecting pressure. Her son had stood there expecting removal. They both thought the arrival of deputies would tilt the morning in their favor before facts ever had a chance to settle. Instead, the facts had settled first. And now the badge she wanted to borrow for power was standing on my side of the fence line reading the same deed she should have respected before she ever picked up her phone. Melissa tried to recover. People like her always do. She said none of this changed the community's concerns. She said the HOA still had unresolved interests around the ranch edge. She said my position in law enforcement created an unfair power imbalance and that the deputies were clearly taking my side because they knew me. That was the worst move she could have made. Because once a bluff collapses, accusing everyone else of bias only makes the original bluff look uglier. The first deputy asked her if she had any deed, survey, easement, or recorded boundary document supporting her claim that the land belonged to the HOA or her son. She did not. He asked whether any sale, transfer, court order, or written agreement existed giving her son rights to the ranch. She did not have that either. Then he asked the question that finally stripped the whole thing clean. So what exactly were you asking 911 to enforce? The silence after that was bigger than the road, the gate, and the whole pasture behind me. Because there was no good answer. Not one. She could not say trespass, because the land was mine. She could not say threat, because I had not raised my voice. She could not say emergency, because there had never been one. All she had left was want. Her son needed it. The HOA wanted it. She thought it should happen. And none of that survives contact with law. The second deputy took a short statement, noted the false property claim, and asked if I wanted a formal record made of the call and the attempted removal demand. I said yes. Melissa looked like she had finally realized the morning was no longer embarrassing. It was documented. That is what broke her. Not the title. Not the deed. Not even the deputies recognizing me. The record. Because once a woman like Melissa creates an official trail showing she tried to use emergency services to push a ranch owner off his own land so her son could take it, the story stops belonging to her. By the time the deputies finished writing down the details, Melissa was no longer arguing about the ranch. She was arguing about the record. That shift mattered. Because people can bluff through a fence-line fight. They can talk in circles around deeds, toss around HOA language, and keep pretending ownership is just one confident sentence away. But once a deputy starts documenting who said what, when the call was made, and what legal basis actually existed, the whole thing stops being theater. It becomes evidence. Melissa felt that. You could see it in the way her voice changed. It got thinner. Faster. Less polished. She said she had only been trying to protect community interests. She said the HOA had long believed the ranch edge was subject to review. She said her son had understood there were future use discussions and that the situation had simply gotten out of hand. Out of hand. Like the morning had somehow escaped her instead of being built by her one choice at a time. The first deputy asked whether the HOA had ever provided her with a recorded claim to the ranch. No. Had her son signed any purchase agreement, easement, option, or transfer paper for the land? No. Had anyone with legal authority told her she could demand that I leave my own property? No. Each answer got smaller. By the third one, even her son had stopped trying to look confident. He was staring at the gravel near the gate like maybe if he looked hard enough, ownership would rise out of the dirt and save him from how stupid the whole thing now sounded. It didn't. The deputy told Melissa the call would be logged as a property complaint with no legal basis for removal and noted that she had attempted to use emergency response to resolve a private demand. Unsupported by title, survey, or lawful authority. Hearing it phrased that way changed her face more than the sheriff reveal had. Because titles can still feel personal. Embarrassing. Political. But that sentence was cold. Administrative. Permanent. I stayed quiet and let it settle. That was the part she hated most. No shouting. No triumph. Just a ranch gate, a morning wind, 2 deputies, and the slow collapse of a story she had expected to control from the second she picked up her phone. Then the first deputy asked me if I wanted her formally warned against returning to the property to make similar claims again without documentation or counsel present. I said yes. That answer landed harder than I expected. Not because it was dramatic. Because it made everything real in the plainest possible way. A formal warning is not loud. It does not feel like revenge. It feels like a door closing on somebody who believed they could keep coming back until pressure finally worked. Melissa heard it exactly that way. You could see the shift in her face the second the deputy explained that any future attempt to remove me, claim the ranch, or use emergency services without lawful proof would be documented as repeated harassment tied to a false property demand. Her son finally spoke then. For the first time all morning, he sounded less like a man expecting land and more like a man realizing he had just stood beside his mother while she burned a bridge in public. He asked if there was some way to clarify things privately before this turned into a bigger issue. The first deputy looked at him and said, "This was your chance to keep it private." That line finished him. Because it was true. Melissa had dragged the fight out to the gate, dialed 911, and tried to turn Want into authority. Now the whole thing sat in a report with time, names, statements, and the one detail she would never be able to soften later. The ranch was mine. Not emotionally. Legally. The deputies gave her the warning, returned to their trucks, and left the road as quietly as they had arrived. The dust settled. The engine noise faded. And for a second, it was just the three of us again at the gate. Only now the whole scene had been stripped down to what it really was. A mother, a son, and a ranch they wanted badly enough to lie about in front of law enforcement. Melissa looked at me like she wanted one final argument. Something sharp. Something she could carry back into the neighborhood and reshape into a story where she still sounded strong. I did not give her one. I just stood there with one hand resting on the gate latch and let the silence do what it was already doing better than I ever could. Her son turned first. That told me all I needed to know. People like him only stay arrogant while they think someone else's confidence will carry them. Once the record turns cold and official, they start moving toward the car before the woman who started it even remembers how to leave with dignity. Melissa stayed 1 second longer. Then she followed him down the road. By noon, the whole neighborhood knew something had gone wrong at my gate. Not the full truth yet. Not the report language. Not the warning Melissa had just received. But enough. In places like that, people can smell a failed power move before they ever hear the details. They see the way someone drives back through the entrance. The speed. The silence. The fact that no one comes home triumphant after calling 911 unless the story went exactly the way they expected. This one hadn't. The first text came from a ranch-adjacent neighbor who had spent years pretending he wanted nothing to do with HOA politics. He asked if it was true deputies had come out over a land misunderstanding. That wording told me Melissa was already trying to soften it. Not false claim. Not attempted removal. Not my son needs your ranch. A misunderstanding. That was always her move after a public failure. Strip the scene of its ugliness, wrap it in neutral language, and hope people fill the gaps with sympathy before facts show up. The problem for her was simple. Facts were already moving faster. One of the responding deputies had family in the development. The county road had 2 workers on it when the cars arrived. Melissa's son had walked back in through the entrance looking like a man who had just realized dreams can become evidence if you say them too confidently in front of the wrong witnesses. By lunchtime, the rumors had started splitting in all directions at once. Some said she tried to take the ranch. Some said she called 911 over a fence argument. Some said the sheriff had been the one standing behind the gate the whole time. That last one spread the fastest. And once it did, everything else got sharper. Because now the neighborhood was not just hearing that Melissa had been wrong. It was hearing that she had picked the worst possible target, used the wrong pressure, and created a record that would not disappear just because she changed her tone in the next HOA email. By mid-afternoon, the board president who had spent years sounding untouchable was no longer the woman managing the narrative. She was the woman people were whispering about. The one who tried to have a ranch owner removed from his own land. The one who called 911 because her son wanted acreage he never had a right to touch. And standing out by the water trough with the pasture stretching quiet behind me, I realized the gate fight had already stopped being the real story. Now it was about what the HOA would do when the woman who used its name like a weapon suddenly became the liability. By evening, the HOA could no longer treat Melissa's stunt at my gate like a private embarrassment. It had become a board problem. That was the shift that mattered most. A rude neighbor can still survive inside an HOA if she knows how to flatter the right people, stir the right fears, and keep her worst behavior just vague enough that others can pretend not to see it. But once a woman uses the association's name to call 911, tries to push a landowner off his own ranch, and gets formally warned in front of witnesses, the mask slips too far to wear again. The board felt it fast. First came the calls. Then the texts. Then the quiet little questions members ask each other when they are trying to decide whether loyalty is about to become expensive. Did she really claim the ranch for her son? Did she actually call emergency services without documents? Did the deputies really warn her? No one asked me directly at first. They did not need to. They already knew enough to be afraid of the rest. By sunset, one board member finally reached out. Not with an apology. Not yet. Just a stiff message saying the association needed to understand the morning incident before it escalated further. That wording told me two things. First, Melissa had not controlled the story the way she hoped. Second, the board already understood this was no longer about a personality conflict at the edge of the subdivision. It was about exposure. Because once an HOA officer starts using the board's name to make false land claims, every resident with an old complaint starts remembering things more clearly. Every strange letter. Every pushed boundary. Every demand that sounded too confident for the paperwork behind it. Melissa had spent years building authority through certainty. Now the certainty itself was under review. And that kind of collapse spreads fast. One resident sent me a screenshot of a neighborhood thread where people were asking whether Melissa had ever shown anyone an actual claim to the ranch. Another said 2 board members were already distancing themselves from her language. A third said Melissa's son had been told, quietly but firmly, to stop speaking about future plans for my land like they were still alive. That one almost made me smile. Because the biggest thing people like Melissa never understand is simple. Power based on bluff feels permanent right up until the first official record cuts through it. After that, even allies start counting the cost of standing too close. And by that night, with a warning logged, the deputies gone, and the whole development whispering through lit windows behind its neat fences, I knew Melissa was no longer fighting for the ranch. She was fighting to survive what she had put on paper without ever meaning to. By the next morning, Melissa Hart was still in the neighborhood. But the version of her that used to matter wasn't. That was the difference. She could still walk out her front door. She could still hold a board title on paper for a few more hours, maybe a few more days. While the HOA tried to figure out how to survive what she had done without admitting how long they had let her behave like that. But the real thing she lived on was already gone. Confidence only works while people believe it has something behind it. Melissa had spent years speaking like the rules bent toward her. She pointed, complained, threatened, and wrapped every ugly impulse in HOA language until people got tired of checking whether the documents matched the tone. Most of the time, that was enough. Most neighborhoods are full of people who would rather avoid trouble than open a county map. But trouble changes shape once a deputy writes it down. That morning at the gate did not end with a shouting match or some dramatic arrest. It ended with something much worse for a woman like Melissa. A record. A false property claim. A 911 call with no legal basis. A formal warning. Witnesses. And my ranch still sitting exactly where it had always been, under my name, behind my fence, untouched by everything except her embarrassment. By lunch, board members were no longer asking whether she had a point. They were asking whether she had exposed the HOA. By afternoon, residents were no longer repeating her story. They were dissecting it. And by evening, the son she had dragged to my gate as proof of some future she thought she could bully into existence was no longer talking about the ranch at all. That was the part one kept thinking about. Not the call. Not the deputies. Not even the moment she learned who I was. The quiet after. The way bluff dies when it has to live in writing. The way entitled people always assume land can be emotionally negotiated until the deed, the fence, and the law all stand in the same place at the same time. She called 911 because she thought my ranch would fold under pressure. Instead, all she really did was hand the county a clean record showing exactly who wanted land badly enough to lie for it. And standing out by the pasture that evening, with the wind moving through the fence grass and the house lights from the HOA glowing in the distance like nothing had changed, I knew something had. Melissa had not lost the ranch. She never had it. What she lost was the one thing she had been using to reach for it. Believability.